Welcome to In-Silico Trials Real Impact, the In-Silico UK podcast that's revolutionizing the way we think about medical innovation. I'm Professor Alejandro Frangi from the University of Manchester, and I'll be your guide through this fascinating world of in-silico technologies. In each episode, we'll dive into cutting-edge research and groundbreaking news that are shaping the future of medical product development and regulation. From computational modeling to simulated clinical trials, we are exploring how digital approaches are transforming healthcare, making it safer, more efficient, more equitable, and incredibly precise. So, whether you're a researcher, regulator, a member of the public, or a patient representative, or simply curious about the future of medicine, tune in as we unravel the complex world of in-silico methods and their real-world impact. Get ready to discover how computer-simulated trials are leading to very real breakthroughs in patient care. In-Silico Trials Real Impact, where algorithms and data are saving lives. Let's begin.
All right, so let's dive into this world of NHS data and how it's being used for research and development. We're going to be going through this report, Unlocking NHS Data for Research. And you might be surprised, actually, how crucial this is, not only for the UK, but for patients, around the world.
Yeah, I think it is fascinating how this data can be used to unlock so much potential. I think the amount of information that the NHS holds is just astounding, and it really is a goldmine for, understanding disease better, developing new treatments, improving how we deliver healthcare.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're talking about secure data environments, or SDEs.
Yeah.
For our listener, can you kind of break down what an SDE actually is? What does it look like within the NHS?
Mm-hmm. So if you can imagine a highly secure digital vault, that's essentially what an SDE is. It's a space where researchers can access and analyze this NHS data. And they can use it for research and development purposes, but without actually compromising patient privacy. So it's a really critical balance between utilizing this really valuable data that we have, but making sure that we maintain the security and the anonymity of patients.
Okay, that's a really helpful image, a secure vault. So it's not just researchers kind of poking around in raw patient records. There are controls in place. But why is this data so valuable for research in the first place? I mean, what's the connection to patients and how they benefit?
Yeah, that's such a key point. So NHS data really underpins a huge amount of research and development that's undertaken by these life science companies. Yeah. And ultimately, that research leads to innovations that benefit patients directly. So you're thinking new medicines, better diagnostics, more efficient healthcare delivery. It all starts with data.
Yeah, and I think that's something people don't realize sometimes is that connection. Like, where does it all begin? And you're right, a lot of it does start with the data, but the report mentions different types of companies using this data.
Right.
It's not just the big pharmaceutical giants that we sort of hear about all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. So the data needs are going to vary depending on, what size the company is or what sector it operates in. So, for example, you might have a smaller company, say a biotech company or a med tech company. They might be using the data primarily for discovery science. So that's really about figuring out what are the underlying mechanisms of disease, or how can we test out new concepts for treatments.
It's like the foundation of their research in a way.
Precisely. Yeah, it helps them kind of develop their ideas, build upon their research. Whereas if you think of a large company, like a pharmaceutical company, they often have much broader needs in terms of the data. So they might be using it for clinical trial design, regulatory approvals, post-authorization safety studies. So you can see across the entire life cycle of a new medicine or a new medical device, data is critical.
Yeah, it makes sense that the bigger companies with, more resources would be involved in those later stages of things, and that they would need that data to support their research. But what about this regional SDE network the report talks about? Can you kind of explain how that works?
Yeah, so as part of the UK's Data for R&D program, they've set up 11 regional SDEs, and each of these covers a specific geographical area, and the populations in those areas can range from around 2.8 million to 10.5 million people.
So rather than one massive national database, it's more of a network of regional hubs in a way?
Yeah.
I can see how that would be beneficial for, research focusing on a specific area, but are there any drawbacks to that kind of regional approach?
Yeah, there are some potential drawbacks. So while the regional SDEs provide, a really rich localized data set, it may not always be suitable for research that needs a larger scale or needs to be more representative of the national population. So, for example, if you have a company who's running a clinical trial for a new drug, they need to make sure that the data they're using reflects the diversity of the whole UK population, not just one specific region.
Right. So how do they address that limitation? Do we just combine all the data from the regions?
So this is where the concept of data federation comes in. So the idea is that you link up data from multiple SDEs to create a more comprehensive and representative data set. But as you can imagine, that's not a simple task. There are quite significant technical challenges, operational challenges in ensuring that the data is compatible. You got to think about things like standardizing formats, addressing privacy concerns. It's very complex.
Yeah, I can imagine that gets complicated very quickly. So it's a balancing act then between having these localized insights from the regional SDEs and then the need for that national perspective for certain types of research.
Absolutely. And one thing the report really emphasizes is that when it comes to GP data, so that's the records from your general practitioner, the ambition should be to have nationally comprehensive coverage of that data and linking it to what we call secondary care data. So that includes things like hospital admissions, specialist consultations. So currently, access to that kind of linked data is mainly through CPRD, the Clinical Practice Research Data Link, but that only covers about 30% of GP data that's linked to secondary care data, and that's only for English patients as well.
So there's still a significant chunk of the population that's not represented in that linked data set.
Yeah.
But why is that link between GP and secondary care data so crucial? It sounds like a lot of effort to bring those two data sets together.
It is, but it's really valuable because it creates a much more complete picture of a patient's health journey. So GP data provides this kind of longitudinal view of, a patient's health history, capturing all their interactions with primary care services. But linking that with secondary care data gives researchers a deeper understanding of things like how diseases progress, the long-term effectiveness of treatments.
So it's like connecting the dots between someone's regular doctor visits and then, their more specialized hospital care. I could see how that would be really valuable for research, especially, for those long-term studies. But the report also talks about some key requirements for this regional SDE network to be successful. Let's kind of unpack those a little bit. What are some of the key technical features that companies need to have access to?
Yeah, so from a technical standpoint, I think one of the top priorities, especially for larger companies, is the ability to analyze representative data from across England. So that kind of goes back to that data federation idea that we talked about.
Yeah. Right. So they're acknowledging that while the regional data sets are valuable, there also needs to be a way to kind of bring it all together for a broader perspective.
Absolutely. And I think another one is the ability to import and export data. So companies often need to bring in their own proprietary data. They might have data from other external sources that they want to combine with this NHS data within the SDE. Conversely, they might need to be able to export the data, perhaps to comply with certain regulatory requirements or to use their own specific analysis platforms.
So it's not just about accessing that NHS data. It's about being able to, integrate it with other relevant data sets and work with it in a flexible way.
Yeah, exactly. And the report highlights the need for what they call a single analytical platform within the SDE. So this would allow companies to do all of their analysis in one environment without having to constantly be switching between different systems or tools, which can be incredibly time-consuming.
It's about making that research process more efficient, more streamlined.
Exactly, yeah. And another key one is direct access to anonymized patient-level data. So this allows companies to actually work with those individual data points rather than just, receiving aggregate summaries of data.
Yeah, that makes sense. If you're trying to, identify subtle patterns or develop very targeted treatments, you need that level of granularity and detail. But of course, anonymization is paramount there to protect patient privacy.
Absolutely. The report really stresses that any access to patient-level data must be strictly controlled. It has to be anonymized to make sure that individuals can't be identified. And this is really important for maintaining, public trust in this whole system. You need that balance between making data accessible for research while also absolutely protecting patient privacy.
Yeah, that's a really important point.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've touched on the technical requirements, but the report also emphasizes the need for what they call commercially competitive timeframes when it comes to accessing data. Why is that such a big deal for companies?
So I think in the life sciences industry, time is money. And delays in data access can significantly impact the research and development timelines. And ultimately, that can lead to, missed opportunities, lost revenue. And companies are operating in a really competitive global landscape. So if the UK wants to attract those companies, it wants to attract investment, it needs to offer, data access that's on par with what's available in other leading countries.
So it's not just about having the data, it's about making that data accessible in a time frame that makes sense from, I guess, a business perspective.
Yeah.
What are the specific timeframes they're aiming for?
Yeah, so companies expect to get a decision on their data access request within 25 working days of submitting it. And then once the request is approved, they expect to be able to access that data within 10 working days.
Okay, so that's a pretty quick turnaround. It sounds like they're trying to streamline that process as much as possible. What about like the release of results? How long does that typically take?
Yeah, so companies would typically expect results to be released from the SDE within 10 working days of the analysis being completed. So I think it's all about, that speed, that efficiency is going to be key to attracting companies who are, working on very tight deadlines or in fast-paced research areas.
Yeah, it sounds like they're trying to strike that balance between, being thorough, being rigorous, but also being responsive to the needs of the industry.
Yeah.
But when you talk about a network of 11 different regional SDEs, I mean, doesn't that create a risk of inconsistency in how things are handled?
It does, yeah. And that's why the report highlights the importance of having harmonized governance, harmonized contracting, pricing processes across the entire network. You can imagine if you have 11 different regions all operating with their own, separate procedures, that creates chaos for companies trying to navigate the system. It would be like having to, learn a new set of rules every time you move to a different region.
Yeah, that sounds incredibly inefficient. So what are some of the specific recommendations for achieving this harmonization?
So one key recommendation is consistent interpretation and decision-making across what they call data access committees. So these are the committees that are responsible for approving data access requests. And essentially, ensuring that the criteria for approving those requests are interpreted and applied fairly and consistently across all the regions means that you have a level playing field, you have increased transparency for everyone involved.
Right, so no company wants to feel like they're getting the runaround or facing different standards depending on which region they happen to be working with. What else is recommended?
So another key recommendation is establishing standard contract templates for data access and for the services that are provided by the SDE. So this just, again, streamlines that whole contracting process. It means that companies don't have to negotiate separate agreements with, each individual SDE. And it's not just the contracts. They also recommend consistent pricing for data access and services across the network as well. So this prevents, price discrepancies between regions. It ensures a transparent, predictable cost structure for companies.
So it sounds like they're really trying to create a unified, user-friendly experience, regardless of which region a company chooses to work with. But beyond the technical and logistical aspects, there's this emphasis on user engagement in the report. They're basically saying, companies need to be more involved in shaping how this regional SDE network works. Why is that so important?
I think if the SDE network is truly going to be successful and meet the needs of the industry, it needs to be designed with those users in mind. And that means involving companies right from the start, understanding what their requirements are, listening to their feedback, and incorporating their insights into how the network is developed.
Yeah, it's that classic build it, then they will come mentality. You can have the best technology, the most robust infrastructure in the world, but if it's not actually meeting the needs of the people who are supposed to be using it, it's going to be a flop.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And the report actually proposes some mechanisms for how this could be achieved. So, for example, one key recommendation is to establish an external stakeholder advisory group. And specifically, they want this group to have industry representation. So this group would basically provide strategic advice to the Data for R&D program. And they would act as, a voice for the users, making sure that their perspectives are heard when decisions are being made about how the SDE network is developed and implemented.
So it's about having a formal channel for that user feedback, making sure that the companies have a seat at the table, so to speak.
Exactly. And they also recommend involving companies in a more sort of operational level as well. So, for example, setting up, technical advisory groups where they could have subject matter experts from the industry who can actually provide guidance on things like, specific technical implementations or data standards or governance procedures.
Yeah, so it's about tapping into that real-world expertise and making sure that the network is being built on a solid foundation of practical knowledge.
Precisely. And I think, that collaborative approach just ensures that from the outset, the network is aligned with, industry best practices, which will hopefully make it more robust and effective. But I think it's also important to remember that the UK isn't operating in a vacuum here. The report mentions competition from other countries in this global health data landscape. So I think that's an important factor to consider in all of this.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's easy to get caught up in the details of what's happening within the UK, but we can't We can't ignore that global context. What does this competition look like?
So, the UK isn't the only country that has, valuable health data resources. A lot of other countries are investing heavily in building their own health data infrastructure, making their data accessible for research and development because they see the potential of this data to drive innovation, drive economic growth.
So it's a global race in a way for data-driven innovation in healthcare.
Yeah, it is. And if the UK wants to kind of stay ahead of the pack, it needs to make sure that its offering is attractive to these companies.
Right, yeah.
And that's where the regional SDE network has the potential to be, a real key differentiator for the UK. But it's only going to be a differentiator if it's designed and implemented effectively. It's not enough just to have data. It's about things like data quality, the ease of access, the speed of data processing, having a supportive regulatory environment. It's about creating that whole ecosystem that's conducive to innovation and makes the UK a really compelling place for these life sciences companies to come and work.
So it's about creating that kind of win-win situation. The SDE network benefits from that, that industry expertise, and the companies benefit from a data infrastructure that's tailored to their needs.
Precisely. And I think that kind of mutual benefit is really key to ensuring the long-term success, the sustainability of this SDE network. But it's not just about attracting the companies, it's about attracting, the best and brightest minds. And the report emphasizes the need to develop a skilled workforce within the SDE network. So what does that look like in practice?
Yeah, I mean, building a robust data infrastructure is one thing, but you need skilled professionals to actually manage it and operate it. So it seems like a pretty significant investment in training and development will be required.
Absolutely. I think investing in training, professional development, capacity building across the whole network is absolutely crucial. It's about ensuring we have those experts who can, handle the technical side of things, the governance, the analytical aspects of the SDE network.
It's about equipping people with the tools and knowledge they need to actually do their jobs effectively.
Yeah. And it goes beyond just, basic training. It's about fostering a culture of, continuous learning, continuous improvement. This field is constantly evolving. Data science is constantly evolving. So, encouraging people to stay up to date on the latest, advancements, technologies, best practices. It's a long-term view of workforce development to make sure this network can adapt to future challenges and opportunities.
Yeah. And speaking of future challenges, one that, we hear a lot about in these discussions is the issue of data standardization and interoperability.
Yeah.
It's a recurring theme, I think, whenever we talk about data sharing, data collaboration. Can you explain why it's such a significant challenge?
So think of it as trying to build a house where you've got bricks and tools that come from different sets, so they don't quite fit together properly.
Okay, yeah.
Health data is often collected and stored in all sorts of different formats using different systems, different coding schemes. So it makes it incredibly difficult to combine data from multiple sources and actually analyze it effectively if you don't have a common language.
It's like trying to have a conversation where everyone is speaking different languages.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's where data standardization becomes so important. It's about establishing that common language for health data so that it can be shared and analyzed, seamlessly across different systems, across different organizations.
So it's about creating a more unified, interoperable, data landscape where information can flow freely but securely.
Precisely. And actually, the report takes us a step further. It suggests that we actually need a comprehensive national data strategy.
Okay, can you expand on that? What would that look like, and why is that so important?
So a national data strategy would be this comprehensive framework for how, health data is collected, how it's stored, how it's accessed, how it's used across the entire healthcare system. It would set out clear standards, guidelines, principles for data governance, and make sure that data is managed responsibly, ethically, and transparently. So it's like creating a blueprint for the future of health data in the UK. And it would mean that you can align all the different stakeholders around a shared vision, a common set of goals.
Yeah, it sounds like a pretty massive undertaking.
It would be. But I think it's a necessary one. If the UK wants to really unlock the full potential of health data, transform healthcare for the better, it's about moving beyond those kind of ad hoc solutions, creating a system that's coherent, efficient, and that people can trust.
And ultimately, it's about using data to improve people's lives.
Absolutely. And I think that should always be the ultimate goal, to leverage the power of data to improve those health outcomes, develop those new treatments, and create a healthcare system that's more responsive to the needs of patients.
That's right.
It's
Yeah.
about making the data work for people, not the other way around.
Yeah.
But to make that happen, I think we need public buy-in. And the report talks about this need for public trust and engagement when it comes to, using NHS data. Why is that so crucial? Because we are talking about, people's personal health information here. That's sensitive and it needs to be protected.
It's a valid concern. People need to know that their data is being handled responsibly, that they're not, guinea pigs in some giant experiment. How do we build that trust, especially when you've got, data breaches and privacy violations making headlines all the time?
I think transparency is absolutely key. People need to understand, how their data is being used. They need to understand why it's valuable for research, what safeguards are in place to protect their privacy. I think we need to be upfront about, both the potential benefits and the potential risks, and we need to involve the public in the conversation. It's not about, dictating terms. It's about engaging in open and honest dialogue.
It's about empowering people to make informed decisions about their data. But let's kind of shift gears a little bit here and get back to the practicalities of this regional SDE network. The report highlights the need for clarity on which types of research are best suited for regional versus national data. Can you maybe unpack that a bit?
Yeah, so it goes back to those data federation challenges that we talked about. So regional SDEs are great for research that's, focused on a specific geographical area or a specific population. They provide those kind of localized insights, which can be incredibly valuable. But if your research project requires a larger, more nationally representative sample, then those regional data sets may not be sufficient.
So it's about picking the right tool for the job, kind of understanding the strengths and limitations of each approach. But I can imagine that could be confusing for some researchers, especially, those who might be new to working with NHS data.
Yeah, and that's why I think clear guidance is so important. The report stresses that there needs to be, readily available information to help researchers figure out, okay, which data sets are actually most appropriate for my needs. It's about making the whole data landscape more navigable, making it easier for researchers to find the right data for their work without getting lost.
Okay, so it's about clarity, guidance, making sure that the researchers have the tools they need to actually navigate the system effectively. But even if you have the right data set, actually accessing and working with that data can be a really complex process. And the report talks about providing a unified and integrated service for users. What would that look like in practice?
So imagine you're a researcher and you need data from, multiple SDEs across the UK. At the moment, you might have to go through, separate application processes, different contracts. You might have to deal with varying data formats, even different governance procedures. It's very fragmented. It's time consuming. So what the report suggests is creating a single point of entry to the entire network. So like a central portal where researchers can go. They can search for data across all of the SDEs, submit a single application, and then access that data through a standardized interface.
So it's like creating a one-stop shop for data access, simplifying the whole process.
Precisely, yeah. A unified point of entry would streamline everything. It would reduce, duplication of effort. It would provide a much more consistent and user-friendly experience, no matter which SDEs the researchers are working with.
It sounds like it would eliminate a lot of headaches for researchers. But even with a system like that, you still need that expertise behind the scenes to make sure it all runs smoothly. The report also talks about, that need for expertise, capacity building within the SDE network. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, building the infrastructure is only the first step. You have to have people with the skills, with the knowledge to manage it, operate it. So that means investing in training, professional development, capacity building, and you need that across the whole network. You have to make sure that you've got skilled professionals who can handle the technical side, the governance side, the analytical side of this.
It's about, equipping people with the right tools and training to navigate what is, a very complex data landscape.
Exactly. And I think it goes beyond just, basic training. You want to foster that culture of continuous learning, continuous improvement. We know this field is evolving all the time. Data science is evolving. So encouraging people to keep up to date with new developments, with new technologies, with best practices. It's a long-term view of how we develop that workforce so we can be sure that the SDE network can adapt to whatever challenges and opportunities the future hold.
Yeah. And speaking of future challenges, one we haven't touched on yet is the financial side of this regional SDE network. And the report is very clear in its recommendation to create a sustainable funding model.
Sure.
Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, we can't just rely on government funding forever. The goal is to make the SDE network self-sustaining. It needs to be able to generate its own revenue, and that would come from the companies and organizations that are using its data and its services.
So finding that balance between serving the public good and also operating like a viable business.
Exactly. And that means that you need to have a very clear pricing structure for data access and the services that you offer. And it needs to be, competitive with what's available in other countries, but it also has to be sufficient to cover the costs of running the network and to invest in future development.
It's a delicate balancing act for sure, but it's essential to make sure this SDE network is viable in the long term and can continue to support that innovation in healthcare.
Absolutely. And I think it goes hand in hand with, developing a diverse portfolio of offerings. The network can't just rely on, one or two things. It needs to have a whole range of services, data products that cater to, the different needs of different user groups. So that might be different tiers of access, different levels of data granularity, analytical services. You might even have customized data solutions for specific research projects.
So it's about creating a flexible system, a responsive system that can adapt to those evolving needs of the research community.
Precisely. And by diversifying its offerings and establishing a sustainable funding model, the SDE network, will be able to ensure its longevity, its ability to keep supporting innovation in healthcare.
So we've talked about the need for a national data strategy, but the report goes even further and suggests that we need a national conversation. Why is that so important, and what do you think that conversation should look like?
Well, I think data isn't just a technical issue, it's a societal issue. And to get this right, to navigate this new data-driven landscape, we need a national conversation that involves everyone. So you're talking about policymakers, researchers, industry experts, and most importantly, the public. This conversation has to address the ethical considerations, the potential benefits, and the risks of using health data.
So it's a call for greater transparency, more open dialogue.
Yeah, absolutely. It's about moving away from this idea that data is something that's managed and controlled behind closed doors. We need to be much more open, much more inclusive in our approach. We need to build that trust. We need to make sure that people feel comfortable with how their data is being used.
It's about democratizing data in a way.
I think that's a great way to put it. Yeah, giving people a voice, giving them a say in how their data is used, and making sure that those decisions are being made in a way that benefits society as a whole.
So this national conversation isn't just about data. It's about values, it's about ethics, it's about building a future where that data is used in a way that aligns with the public's best interests.
Precisely. And I think it's about recognizing that data has the power to transform healthcare, but it also has the power to be misused. So by being open about these issues, by having honest conversations about them, we can create a system that's innovative, but it's also trustworthy.
This is like a tall order, but it's a really important one.
Mm-hmm.
We can't just shy away from these complex issues.
Absolutely. I think we need to engage with them head on and create a system that's, responsible, but also forward-looking.
And speaking of forward-looking, let's kind of zoom out a bit and talk about that bigger picture. The report highlights the immense potential of this regional SDE network to really boost the UK life sciences sector. What kind of impact are we talking about here?
I think the impact could be transformative. Imagine, this thriving ecosystem of life sciences companies, from small startups to multinational giants. And they're all being drawn to the UK because they have access to this incredible, this really valuable and rich, NHS data.
It sounds like almost an economic engine powered by data.
Exactly. And I think that engine has the potential to drive significant economic growth, not just for the life sciences sector, but for the UK economy as a whole. So you're talking about, investment, job creation, the development of, groundbreaking new treatments and technologies.
So it's about creating this kind of virtuous cycle where access to data fuels innovation, which then leads to economic growth and better healthcare outcomes.
Precisely. And it's about, positioning the UK as a global leader in this data-driven healthcare. It's about attracting the best minds, the most innovative companies from all around the world.
Yeah, it's an ambitious vision. But as we've discussed, there are a lot of challenges to overcome. The report kind of lays out a number of hurdles that need to be addressed.
Mm-hmm.
What do you see as kind of the biggest challenges facing this regional SDE network in the next few years?
I think one of the biggest is just the sheer complexity of the data landscape itself. I mean, we've talked about, how health data is often fragmented, it's siloed, it's stored in different formats. So bringing all of that data together in a way that's secure, that's accessible, that's interoperable. It's a monumental task.
It's like trying to solve a giant jigsaw puzzle with pieces from different sets.
That's a great analogy. Yeah, it requires a lot of technical expertise. You need a lot of coordination, a lot of collaboration to actually make that work.
And then you've got the cultural and organizational barriers to overcome as well.
Absolutely. We need to move beyond this kind of traditional siloed approach to data. We have to foster a culture of data sharing, data collaboration, not just within the NHS, but across, the whole research ecosystem. So that means breaking down those silos, building trust, and developing, clear guidelines, clear incentives for data sharing.
It's not just about the technology, it's about the people, it's about the processes.
Exactly. We need to make sure that everyone involved actually understands the importance of data sharing and the value that it can bring. It's about a shift in mindset, a shift in culture, in how we think about and approach health data.
And even if we can overcome those technical and those cultural challenges, there's still the question of funding. How do we make sure that this SDE network has the resources that it needs to actually thrive in the long term?
It's a crucial question. And as we said earlier, the report really emphasizes the need for a sustainable funding model.
And what does that look like? Where does the money come from?
Well, it probably involves a combination of different sources. You're talking about government support, industry partnerships, philanthropic contributions, revenue generated from the data access and services.
So it's about creating this kind of more robust, more resilient funding ecosystem that can actually support the growth and development of the network.
Exactly. And it's about recognizing that investing in this data infrastructure is a long-term commitment, but it's one that will pay dividends for years to come.
So it sounds like this regional SDE network is kind of at this critical juncture. There's this huge potential for positive impact, but there are also some significant challenges to address. What are the key priorities for the network over the next, say, few years?
I think the number one priority has to be building trust. And that's trust with the public. It's trust with potential industry partners. We need to demonstrate, not just through words, but through actions, that we are handling this data responsibly, ethically, and with the utmost care when it comes to security. Transparency is key. People need to understand how the data is being used and what benefits it's delivering.
Trust is the foundation for everything else.
Absolutely. If you don't have trust, the whole system falls apart. And alongside trust, I think we need to focus on interoperability, breaking down those data silos, creating a system where information can flow seamlessly, securely between the different SDEs, but also across the wider healthcare ecosystem. And that means adopting common standards, having robust governance procedures, and investing in the right technologies.
So creating this unified, integrated data landscape that's fit for purpose.
Precisely. And I think another big priority is data quality. The insights we get from this data are only as good as the data itself. So we need to make sure that the data is accurate, it's complete, it's consistent. If it's not, we risk drawing the wrong conclusions, making, bad decisions.
Data quality, yeah. Garbage in, garbage out.
Exactly. And I think finally, we need to think about the user experience. If we want this SDE network to be successful, it has to be easy to use. It has to be intuitive. It has to be tailored to the needs of the users. So that means designing user-friendly interfaces, providing clear guidance and support, streamlining those processes as much as possible.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, researchers are busy people. And they need a system that's efficient, that's user-friendly.
Absolutely. If the user experience is good, it's much more likely that the network will actually be adopted and used effectively.
So we kind of have a roadmap for success. You build trust, you ensure interoperability, prioritize data quality, focus on the user experience. But beyond the practicalities, I'm interested in the big picture. What excites you most about the potential of this regional SDE network? What kind of future do you see for data-driven healthcare in the UK?
What excites me most is the potential to move from a reactive system of healthcare to a proactive one. Imagine a future where we can use all of this data to identify individuals who are at risk of developing certain conditions and then intervene early, prevent those conditions from even taking hold. Imagine tailoring treatments to individual patients based on, their unique genetic makeup, their lifestyle factors, their environmental exposures.
It's the future of personalized medicine. Preventative medicine, precision medicine.
Exactly. And I think it's a future where patients are, empowered to take control of their own health. They're armed with the knowledge and insights that come from their data.
Yeah, it's a really powerful vision. And it's one that I think that we can all get behind But it's a future that requires, us to make the right choices now. We need to make those investments. We need to build that trust. We need to foster that culture of data sharing and collaboration.
Yeah, it really is a vision that I think is worth striving for. We have this incredible opportunity to really harness the power of this data to change healthcare, but we have to be really thoughtful, really responsible in how we approach it.
It's about progress, not just progress for the sake of it, but progress that actually makes a difference in people's lives, progress that makes healthcare more effective and more equitable. But let's go back to the data itself for a second. We've talked about this idea of, data sharing and collaboration, but can you give some concrete examples of how this data is actually being used today in research? I think our listeners would really benefit from hearing about some of these real world applications.
Yeah, absolutely. I think concrete examples always help. Well, I think one area where we're seeing real progress is using NHS data to develop new treatments for diseases like cancer, Alzheimer's, heart disease. So researchers are using this data to identify new drug targets, to design better clinical trials, and I think really importantly, to personalize treatments. So that's based on a patient's individual genetic profile.
So it's not just about understanding the diseases better, it's about translating that knowledge into actual treatments that can, make a difference, that can help people. What are some other exciting areas where this is being used?
Yeah, I think another area that's really interesting is using NHS data to improve healthcare delivery, so making the system more efficient. So researchers are using the data to identify bottlenecks in hospital care, for example. They can predict patient admissions, they can optimize, the allocation of resources. And all of this can lead to shorter wait times, better patient outcomes, and ultimately a more cost-effective healthcare system.
So it's about making the system smarter, using data to make it smarter and more responsive to the needs of patients.
Exactly. Yeah. And we're also seeing some really cool things happening in digital health. So companies are using NHS data to develop new apps, new wearables that can actually help people manage their own health conditions. So think about, apps that can track blood sugar levels for diabetics, apps that can monitor heart rate and activity levels for people with cardiovascular disease. There are even apps that use artificial intelligence to detect early warning signs of mental health conditions.
It's like putting the power of the data directly into the hands of the patients.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's one of the things that I'm most excited about in this whole field is that potential to really empower patients, give them more control over their own health.
Yeah, it's a shift from that kind of paternalistic model of healthcare to one that's more collaborative, more patient-centered.
Precisely. And I think that shift is being driven in large part by this increasing availability of data and the tools that we have to analyze it, to interpret it.
But access to data is just, it's just one part of this, this whole equation. As we've talked about, there are so many challenges, the technical hurdles, the ethical issues, the need for sustainable funding. What do you think is the key to really unlocking the potential of this whole data revolution in healthcare?
I think the key is collaboration. No single organization, no single sector can do this alone. We have to break down those silos. We have to create a truly collaborative ecosystem where you have the researchers, the policymakers, the industry experts, and the public all working together, all pulling in the same direction.
It's about, harnessing that collective wisdom, that collective expertise of everyone who's involved.
Absolutely. We need to share knowledge. We need to share resources. We need to work together to overcome these challenges. And we need to do it in a way that's transparent, it's ethical, it's accountable to the public.
It's about building a system that's not just innovative, but also trustworthy, a system that's equitable.
Absolutely. That's the kind of data-driven future for healthcare that I think we should all be aiming for.
Couldn't agree more. And on that note, I think we'll wrap up this deep dive into the world of NHS data and secure data environments. It's been a fascinating look, I think, at the challenges, the opportunities, and this huge potential of using data to really transform how we deliver healthcare. And to our listeners, we hope this has given you a better understanding of this complex and rapidly evolving landscape and why it matters, not just for the future of research and development, but for the future of healthcare itself.
Thanks for having me. It's been great to talk about this.
And to our listeners, we encourage you to keep learning about this topic. It's a conversation that's really only just beginning, and your voice, your perspective is incredibly important.